Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks to all the speakers for today. I guess most of you have heard and seen them, but for those of you that came in late, I like that Shafi did a quick round yesterday for the panel to introduce themselves. This also gives me a chance to introduce myself. My name is Frauke Kreuter. I guess I'm a sociologist by training, if I think about it, but worked all my life as a statistician and survey statistician, and have dabbled around the Simons Institute in computer science a little bit over the last 6 months. When we had when I heard about this idea of the workshop, I was like, okay, well, let's contribute with the social sciences to it. And so that's what this day was all about, and I was very happy to see how this panned out. And for context, and you will see some of my questions have to do with that. I'm currently the president of the American Association for Public Opinion Research. And in that role, facing a lot of these questions that we talked about today, what to do with synthetic data, what to do with falling response rates, with increasing data collection costs. And that was already a problem before NSF and other government agencies signaled that there isn't any more money to collect data, right? So this is the starting point for the discussion that I will expose the panel to. And but before that, maybe we can do a quick round and just each of you say a sentence or two.
Thanks. So I'm Ran Canetti. I'm a cryptographer by training at Boston University. But I don't know, 8 years ago or something, I started realizing that, all these things we write in introductions of cryptography papers just in order to explain the math, to kind of to motivate the math about people not trusting each other and the social impacts of cryptography actually are real things. It's motivated me to start reaching out to people in the law school at BU and in other universities and try to understand, reach out and understand how does computer science thinking, cryptographic thinking, which is a very specific type of thinking, can affect and impact or whatever help other disciplines or interact with other disciplines. Law, then the whole issue of fairness of data and privacy in data. And now with the brave new world of LLMs, trying to use cryptographic thinking to make a dent there. That's me.
I spoke earlier, so I'll just keep this short. Stephanie Ekman. I'm a researcher at the University of Maryland, statistician and survey methodologist.
And me also short. Roberto Rigobon, economist at the Sloan School at MIT.
I'm Rich Zemmel, and you've heard a lot from me, not always just introducing people so far. I'll introduce myself. I'm a computer scientist here at Columbia and director of the Arnie Institute for Artificial and Natural Intelligence. Now, in terms of the topic that we discussed today, so I've done a number of work that's relevant, a number of things that are relevant to that, one of which is on trustworthy AI and fairness for a number of years. I've worked in that area. And also, in something we didn't used to call synthetic data, but was about imputing missing data, was the old name. And it was, in that case, so I did a lot of work on recommender systems, for example. And some people might know, for example, the Toronto paper matching system. That's something we developed. And the idea there was to fill in missing data about, what's your given reviewer's expertise on a paper, right? And so that was interesting missing data problems and synthetic data problems back then. And I have a lot of more recent work, but that's maybe I'll talk about that some later.
I'll also keep it short because I just gave my talk. So my name is Tiana Zernich. I'm a postdoc at Stanford. By training, I'm a statistician, computer scientist, and I work on the foundations of machine learning.
Great. So thank you all. And as I promised, I'm going to start with this big question that's in our heads down the road, down the coast, in the Washington, D.C. area, because Rich, you said you worked on fairness, and we know that in the fairness literature, benchmark data sets like the American Community Survey turned into folk tables. I don't know if you were part of that, but have played a big role, you know, and Stephanie, you worked at government contractors that collected data that the Census Bureau might use. So, you know, with fundings under threat, and as we heard several times today, a clear notion that you could generate data that are sometimes good enough, that has been shown. Certainly they are cheaper, unless we conduct the real cost, but seemingly cheaper, maybe I should say, not certainly. My hunch is that there will be a big pressure to use such data generating processes in the future. You know? And we had seen, you mentioned, Stephanie, this switch in the profession to non-probability surveys, and the American Association for Public Opinion Research had for the first, I would say, 5 years of that existence or movement said, oh, no, we're not going to do this. And, you know, this is not the APOS standards, and this doesn't, you know, it's not matching our transparency requirement and whatnot. It's everywhere now. And the journals publish studies based on those data because for certain contexts, it works, you know. If you want to, you know, do experiments and whatnot, it works. So here, I think it will go faster because the price is even cheaper, and it's cool, right? and the agencies tell me, you know, we get asked, like, why aren't you using that? Why aren't you using that more, right? And I'm glad, Rich, that you brought up this issue of imputation. We used to call it imputation because I do remember the first time when I taught imputation in the Stats department in Munich, the students, they would say, like, what, you're just making up data? Right? That was their reaction, the statistics students, right? That was their reaction to imputation. But then, you know, a few years in, they got used to it. It was like, of course, yeah, imputation is cool. It's what we do, right, to fix the data set. And so this kind of transformation, I can see happening. I see it there on the horizon. And so I'm asking this panel of experts here, what do you have to do in terms of infrastructure to get this right, right? So when do we turn to Tiana to tell us, you know, this is the right mixture of true data that we need and synthetic data, you know? When do we turn to Roberto, who tells us, no, hands off here, or the opposite, where it says like, well, let's take the AI and weep out the horses, you know, because we want to have the same benefits, right? So I would like to hear from you what your take on this. Is that what would be a good path for the profession to take to move this in a more controlled and systematic way so that we're not like still dealing with horse shit 10 years from now? Tiana, do you want to
technical term? Yeah.
Sure, I can give some thoughts. I mean, I think that there's basically no magic, you know, that's happening here. Like, for example, in the things that I talked about, I think that we shouldn't believe that it's possible to create information out of thin air, right? Like, if it's possible to generate information out of nothing, then, you know, everything that we've been teaching in statistics and methodology and so on, everything is wrong, right? So I don't believe that that's possible. I think we need to be, I would say, like, one necessary condition, and that's certainly not sufficient, is to be very clear about where we are making assumptions and what kind of assumptions we are making. And so I, you know, that's kind of clear from the approach that I've taken. I don't believe that the right path is to go towards like, oh, synthetic data will actually be like really representative of real data. It will be as good as real data, especially because I think in, say, social sciences, a lot of you know, a lot of data that we are collecting is intrinsically subjective. Like, a lot of opinions that we are collecting are intrinsically subjective. There is no such thing as ground truth. And I don't believe that we'll ever be able to steer language models to perfectly reflect the opinions of some, you know, very particular demographic group, for example, that we care about studying. So my general take is that, you know, we still need some kind of trusted source of data or information. And, you know, AI can definitely help accelerate our discovery and augment our data sets, but I don't believe that on its own it's enough. So I think we need to be like very clear about the limitations and like what is actually possible with these models, because I really don't believe in creating information out of thin air.
I'll disagree.
Okay.
So I think that currently, certainly the models are quite limited. But I do think that with enough data, I think we can create new instances that go beyond what we have in the data. So it's kind of like it's not up here, Shlomo's example, like, in the census data, if you have very large public data that you're starting with, like the 2010 census when you want to do differential private versions of 2020 or something, right? So if you have a very large set of data that you can build on, in the future, I think we will be able to do a good job of simulating responses from certain demographic, lots of demographic groups, and simulate them to the degree to which it's very convincing. I think we're far from that now, but in terms of the limits that's there, I think it is potentially there where we could do that and potentially extrapolate a little bit, like, create new individuals that might come in the future in that demographic group.
But how granular are these groups? I think that's the question. Right. I believe we'll get better at that, but it depends on how granular.
Yeah, so I think that is the current issue. Really, to me, is all about the evaluation. Right. So how can we really evaluate these things to say, to what extent are they reflecting the views of some granular demographic group? So to do that, again, you need a lot of data to compare to. So it's all about having that data set that you can compare to, and really at the granular level, looking at not just some average response, but looking across many different responses, many questions, and the whole statistics of those responses.
Right. Stephanie, I can see that you want to jump in. So let me formulate, you're jumping into a question. So that sounds to me like you need benchmarks, right? And you need to make sure those benchmarks have the high quality. Do you think, Stephanie, we can hold on to them, though?
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, so to take Shlomi's point, like he started with the 2010 to begin researching how am I going to make the 2020, or the Census Bureau used the 2010 census to begin researching on differential privacy for 2020. And you're talking about like needing benchmark data sets as well. And I think that's what gets me so worried about the changes that we're now seeing in the federal statistical system. I live in Washington, D.C., and so everywhere I go, I'm running into people who are losing their jobs or about to lose their jobs, and it's not a great vibe right now in the city. And so I worry about that threat to the benchmarks, right? So even for the persona approach that I showed, right? I am this kind of person. Who am I going to vote for? Or what do I think about such and such? We need to know the relative proportions of those different personas, right? And that ultimately all comes from these high-quality data sets that we have in the U.S., mostly from the census. I mean, there's a bunch of different data sets, but they all reference the U.S. Census. And if the U.S. Census is getting pressure to start using synthetic data themselves, then we're already in this trap that we've been talking about, where we're training data on synthetic data that was from synthetic. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
I made my point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, so I wanted to say, like, again, putting kind of like a theoretician or cryptographer with sort of thinking hat. So I think the word benchmark, it's just, I should make it into more kind of a definition of what it is that we want from large language models, so we can use it. So I think in particular, it cannot be closed source. It cannot be commercial. It has to be open, and it has to be something that we understand how it was sampled from the beginning to the end, and we can actually argue about it, and we can maybe redo it and replicate it, and we can have like 10 different copies of the same LLM, just sampled with different randomness, right? And we can and then we can modify it, and then we can understand what gives and what it does, and then we can get maybe a better understanding of what is the quality of the data that it gives. And maybe this is, it will still be synthetic data, but with data with some statistical guarantees that maybe we can use in a more rigorous way.
Well, I was talking to one of the students during a break about like what's the most open model, right? Is that one from Allen Institute, right? Where they've got open from the beginning of the training data all the way through to the end, right? So even if you were using that data set, like I still don't know that we understand it well enough.
Right, but at least this we can maybe have a hope to understand. Maybe this is something we can replicate, maybe. So
let me add a couple of different points here. So one is the U.S. So the U.S. has never considered the statistical office an essential institution. So what we are seeing is just the extreme event of a country that, in general, I remember, 2012 when Obama had to stop the government, that actually the BLS did not produce an inflation rate. And I had the Central Bank of the United States calling Alberto and me to ask what our own inflation rate was. To which I remember Alberto said, I think this will be a good time to renegotiate our funding. But, but we stopped the production of the inflation rate in the United States because we could not get the debt ceiling raised on time. I mean, how pathetic that is. The cost of $70 trillion was not enough for Congress to get it act. So one is, I think that I hope that this disaster changes a little bit the attitude of Congress and in general, that we make statistics an essential institution to the working of this society. So that's one point in general, just rambling. But we should not allow this to happen. So that's one point. Then the second one is that unfortunately, so I love what you're saying, Ran. If we could have something that is unbiased and that has all the data, like the media outlets are supposed to be. Okay, so they have the same data, and what they process to us is just externally biased. And my fear is that LLMs are used both as a source of divulging information, but also to change public opinion.
Right.
I have this example. I went to DeepSeek and I asked the question, what happened in June of 1989 in Beijing? And, it was a random question. It was not a bad intention.
Not random.
And the answer was, I prefer to talk about coding. Yeah. So, it's just... and then I went to Gemini and I asked, what happened on... And I did this on purpose. What happened on January the 6th, 2020? Which I know is the wrong year, don't worry. And so you will see that it has a point at the end. And the answer was, there was a partial eclipse in the north of the United States. I said, oh, I didn't know, that's good. I said, and what happened the following year, 1921? And the answer was, there was no partial eclipse. So, I just find the answers, this has an intention. So these are not a scientist getting a data with a purpose. And even if there's some of them that have that credibility, unfortunately, this is very costly to produce.
But that's closed source, and that's commercial.
I understand.
Something that So
I understand, but
that's why we need to have something in academia that would know that. And if somebody does it, then you can write your paper and do another thing, right?
But if you can make money out of divulging information, I'm telling you, there's no way we can put our resources to compete with that. So we need to create the norms and the standards separately, but assume that this is going to be privately provided, because I don't think we will have the resources to be able to do this. To keep up, exactly. So maybe we can do once, but...
So then let's talk about norms and standards for a moment, Ren. So how would a way to evaluate closed source model look like, so that we feel like we have some form of, standardization, checking that if I know, okay, here's a synthetic data set that has been produced with this and this model, but it follows I can check on it the following guarantees. I can, evaluate it. Do you have any ideas how that could look like? To Roberto's point, we won't likely not have the resources to get as good of a model if we try to do it entirely open source.
So it's a great question, and I think you can ask the same question on any other software that is being sold, right, and being consumed by the masses, and somehow so what I think would be the great thing to do is to actually force or whatever, require the vendors to actually have claims about the qualities of the software. And this is how it's done, and this is how it operates, and these are the guarantees that I give you that it should be given. Like how many calories there is and what's the fat level. It should be the same thing for any software, right? And in fact, it should be for LLM, and it should be for operating systems, should be for any piece of software. It should be a standard, right? And somehow we went the wrong way, something in the 90s, 80s, and we kind of agreed to not do it. Maybe we didn't understand enough, and then we are whole kind of maybe 40 years too late. But that would be the way to do it.
So this reminds me of, Roberto, your talk, where you talked about the cars and having norms and regulation around cars. And we have, you know, in Germany, we have the TÜV. I guess there's something similar here. You have get inspect. Well, actually, there isn't. But anyway, you know, in Germany, one level up, you know, we have every 2 years, you have to have your car checked whether it's still safe for the roads and that kind of thing. But, you know, you have that here too.
Yeah, here we do the same here. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Every year here, actually.
All right. Even
We're
better.
much better than Germans.
Much every 3 months. Okay, cool. Anyway, so along those lines, right? And there's processes and whatnot.
Right.
And I mean, NIST and other institutions are discussing this right now. So what would you need to look for there? But what would you need to look for it if you think of it through the lens of a data production that is meant to reflect the society in some form?
So I would love to know, Richard, there are measures about self-censoring on LLMs that you know that they censor themselves somehow. That it's something that we could measure, like what we do with the media.
Self-censoring isn't saying. I mean, they certainly opt not to answer questions. That's one form of self-censoring, right, for safety reasons.
Yeah.
Right? But I think in terms of this, like what would be the validation, I think it goes back to what we were talking about. That if you have, and it goes for the survey data, imagine that you have the kinds of tests that you would have would say, okay, here's a new demographic group. Here's a sample of responses from that demographic group. Can you generate other samples, synthetic samples, and then look at the statistics that are generated and have some held out statistics and see to what extent the generated samples are different than the ones that were given, the kind of, you know, the true examples that were given. So they generate new data points, and the statistics match the desired statistics. So to me, that's the kind of test you can imagine, a standardization thing for a whole bunch of different demographic groups that would be relevant for surveys.
And what will happen when they fail?
When they fail, then you have to report this. If you're using it in your the survey methodologists are using it, they have to report which ones they used and, you know, to what extent, how they scored on these standardization tests.
And it can be accompanied with some more structural with the representations about what kind of mechanisms were applied after the training, what kinds of safety measures they applied, what they didn't apply, and you know, so that we can have answers. You know, can we use this particular tool for this for this purpose? Right?
Just to add one quick thing on that. You know, currently in machine learning, there's this fairly new thing called a model card that you have to submit, right? Which describes your model and how it was trained and, you know, its kind of characteristics. So it'll be the same thing here for the data card, I imagine, right? This is synthetic data. It was generated by this model, and these are the kind of tests that it passed and what it didn't pass.
Yeah, just maybe like following up on that point, I think it is very important to think about what the downstream use case is. I think it's very hard to define general standards and norms without thinking about who's going to use that data, what exactly is going to be reported. Like, it's possible that the model will be used in some very, very specific way, right? Like maybe you have like one survey question that you want to answer. You want to get like a representative sample from, say, the U.S. population for that one question. That is much less ambitious than checking, you know, a bunch of like responses to different questions and how those relate and studying interactions and so on. So I think it's, to me, it feels like it's promising to think about what the interface is between the model and how it's going to be used downstream, because I think that there might be some simpler checks and norms that we need for simpler downstream tasks.
I also have worked on data imputation. So for data imputation, I think this is, I don't have a problem whatsoever. I think we understand it enough. But the lack of replicability that we have with the LLMs is I don't know how good will that be, that data card will make me feel safe. So I presume the worst. Let's do it the following way. Presume the worst, that I'm going to create my own data so that my paper shows something like absolutely extraordinary will happen in my data, and then I will get like 2 million citations, okay? You just assume that random sample that has never happened maybe happens. Is that okay? We already have bad reputation in academics because some of them have done it. And I give you my data record, and that cannot be replicated. I just put it on ChatGPT, I replicate exactly the same instructions, and if I did it correctly or incorrectly, you will not be able to get the same answer. So, that is different when I run the Stata program, no? I mean, and we have learned to live with a bootstrap, by the way, but it took a while.
Right.
I mean, because by construction, the bootstrap, we have different random generator numbers, what actually means to be random. So we had to work a lot on learning at least the bootstrapping part. So the lack of replicability is the part that scares me from this.
I want to say something to that. I completely, sympathy, empathy, whatever.
No, because you're going to give me a solution, so you're sympathetic. So just go ahead.
Yeah. No, listen. No, but no, seriously. I'm not sure. I mean, that we should give up on. I say we can never in open source model can never compete with the top closed source ones. It's not clear that we need to compete at the same level. I mean, so some of the things that Shlomi didn't have time to show is that in this surrogate public data work that for some uses you don't need very sophisticated LLMs.
Yeah,
some basic ones are enough. Right, and I think maybe for many of those very specific questions that I think other people showed similar things that simple models are good enough to estimate. Your work you showed that to estimate some parameters, and these are replicable, right? And if they're open source, right? And so maybe that's the way to go. Maybe we don't need to use ChatGPT for those things, but use the open source, replicable, simpler ones. Maybe they will do just as well.
So this is great. I'm glad you reminded us of the surrogate data, because I was going to ask a slightly different question here, moving away from the lack of funding maybe for the original data sources. There's another reason, right, to use, as you showed, synthetic data, and maybe have the synthetic data be in the data archives for researchers to use and others, instead of right now the original data, not just from data collection entities like the census, but also researchers. I mean, there are right now, I believe, 8,000 different data sets in the ICPSR archive or something like that, several million. I mean, you had that, yeah, exactly. So anyway, there's so many, right? And some of them can be used directly, others not, right? Would you envision a world where we, with increased sophistication of the models to create them, start sharing synthetic data and only those?
I don't know. I mean, if it's so easy and cheap to make synthetic data, why wouldn't you just start from scratch and make your own, right? Why would I use Ron's data set and just make my own? And I can't see the value of that. I feel like we're going to lose control over that.
But the cost might not be, right? It might not be because of the cost. It might be cheap, but maybe there's just like a lot of sophisticated techniques that go into curating this synthetic data set that have nothing to do with the cost, but just like maybe expertise from a particular domain, and a particular domain expert uses the model in a particular way. I can imagine a world where that happens.
Yeah. Ron, you were about to say.
So I think okay, if you use differential privacy, then you can use your data set that you get for some predefined or specific sets of applications or statistics, but you'll never be able to get a data set that is differentially private and can answer accurately all statistics. It's just not possible. It's just like inherently in contradiction. And people have shown it formally. So you need to kind of choose. So maybe you want to do some such statistics, some others not. But in some sense, it's ingrained and inherent, and it's good. I mean, actually, there's works that show that differential privacy is exactly the same mechanism of making, adding noise to data is good against overfitting. Is a measure against overfitting. If you use data which is differentially private, that you cannot do this p-hacking by design. So it is good and bad, right? So it will be good for some purposes, but not for all. But again, we can do it ourselves. We can control it, right? How much noise we put in, and how much how much to be exposed, and to what applications we use it.
Let me start. But in this context, you're calling the differential privacy data that has been released. That will be for you the synthetic data.
For instance, yeah.
Oh, but that's like a very low-level synthetic data for me.
Yeah.
That one I have no problem.
Yeah. Right.
So it's not like I understand differential privacy, but I think that somebody will do it.
Yeah, don't need to. Yeah.
And today I realize that I understand even less.
But
So before I open it up to the audience, I have one more question that relates this panel here to yesterday. And we talked about resilience yesterday. That was one of the important keywords. And the data knowledge that's sort of packed into the synthetic data, no matter the mechanism how we get there, in a way is, as long as we generate it out of the existing source, somewhat resilient to change and picking up change, right? And sometimes this is referred to as, carrying forward existing bias in the data sets, right? And on the positive side, it's not following every fluke and resilient, and that's in the capturing the knowledge that is actually there. How do you see that pan out? I mean, maybe back to you, Tidjana. Initially, when the tech companies started using the language models to label data, I think there was some of that worry that you would, not have enough information. And now they're all loving it and using it all the time, right? And so, how do you see that trade-off between enough change in the data sources and the data that's get generated, back to Roberto's spiral and the path from it, versus a resilience, to keeping the authenticity of the data intact?
Yeah, so I think, again, maybe it depends on what the downstream use case is, but I think of this data as serving as data augmentation in some sense to the original data. And data augmentation can be good, it can be bad, depending on how it's used. And I think we need, again, to think about how to benchmark these models for different use cases, think about what we think, some expert sources are, ground truths, however close we can get to a notion of ground truth and so on. So I think it's basically like data augmentation. It can be done poorly, it can be done well. We need to figure out the right error metrics to measure.
And I would also say that in a similar way to how you have these census data, you have kind of ground truth data that are time-stamped. You imagine you also like to do that with your synthetic data, and imagine that the synthetic data is going to evolve, and it can evolve both as the models get developed, they change, and the training data on which they're trained on gets changed. So it's quite interesting, I think, to think about how the synthetic data to what extent can it track changes, like go back to surveys and opinion surveys. If there's changes in opinions of individuals through time, groups of individuals through time, is it possible to model that kind of thing with synthetic data? So I think that's an interesting, challenging problem.
Maybe a quick follow-up to that. One thing that we didn't get the chance to discuss at the end of the panel yesterday is what happens when these models, as you said, develop over time and get out in the wild and start to adapt to me individually, right? I mean, this is sort of where the at least the funding hope is, and big companies hope to make the real money, right? That you have this personal assistant that's sort of learning to you and more and more and more. And there, I think you would run even more into that problem or that question.
Right. But I think that, so it's good and bad, right? So I think that's it can be a benefit or viewed as positive or negative, right? So if it keeps up and it's kind of current with the time, then it could be generating data that's current for that time, as long as that data becomes time-stamped, right? So it's good if it can keep up with and evolve through time. And back to the panel from yesterday, as they were talking about, and Daniela talked about, right, there's some benefits to being resilient. In some cases, you don't want to be resilient. So I think this is a case of like, what aspects do you want to change through time? What aspects don't you? And it's kind of open questions, I think, that are interesting challenges.
And how did we know?
Yeah.
Roberto, you're looking like
No, I think the question, how do you know? So first, I agree that let me think about this as a service, so that is providing a service to a family or to an individual.
Yeah.
I will hope that actually changes. I mean, the preferences of us do not necessarily change that much on the main principles, but preferences of individuals about choices and actions change dramatically. So we are severely irrational. I mean, like in our behavior, and we do change. So I would expect the LLM to adapt to my realities. And you have a kid, well, that changes your life completely. So you buy Disney, and then that's it, no? So, but understanding what is the metric, I think, is a little bit of the question that I asked Stephanie about what are the residuals. So that 15% that was not explaining, what are the mistakes that we're making? And maybe that's the place where we should start evaluating. So is the LLM always confirming my biases? Then that implies a little bit on that 15%. Because, I mean, you nailed the 85, that's fine, but the 15 is always in one single direction. So it's kind of exacerbating my bias. And maybe that's the metric that we need, is to look at the errors that we make. And then hopefully as a user, if we are thinking that this is going to be individualized, I can tell the LLM which direction I would like to be corrected. And so maybe that's the adaptive part. That, but I agree that it's good that it changes. I just don't know exactly how to personalize it, and I will pay attention to the mistakes. As an economist, I mean, economists are a really bad profession. We're always unhappy, okay, and we are always negative. And in fact, Stephanie is not an economist, but she works with economists. That explains all the negativity in her presentation. I mean, because like engineers are like super positive and about life, and like they can solve every problem in life. Like computer social scientists, they are always happy, and like we are miserable all the time. And the reason is that we're always thinking about the worst possible case. And here is, when I think about the worst possible case, I'm thinking about someone that wants to manipulate my opinion, wants to manipulate my learning, wants me to take an action that is suboptimal for me and my family. And then how do I avoid that? How do I detect that? And by the way, it's not like I'm old enough that I remember the news at 7 p.m. when they used to be very balanced. I mean, there were biases, okay? But they were the distance between their statements, when you only have 4 TV channels, and they don't earn money by clicks, they earn money by people watching the TV, that business model implied that the news were kind of very concentrated. Of course, there's difference of opinion, and someone was more right on the left. But the day we change the business model to clicks, now I want to confirm biases. Because now I don't want to learn the truth, I want to just be satisfied with making me happy. And it's just a tiny, and this is not the internet, it's just the business model. The business model just changes dramatically. So how do I avoid that from happening in LLMs? Yeah, Ran, you're right. One alternative is to have this publicly financed in a way, so it's a public good. Yeah. And therefore, we say this is the tool that you will use to generate the data. And in that sense, I think that
for benchmarking.
Maybe in that sense, we will be able to use it. And especially I will use it for things like imputation of the data, completing the data. I am obsessed with CO2 emissions. My question to you was entirely about CO2 emissions. According to the best statistic that we have, we are producing 42 billion metric tons of CO2. Now, when you actually look at the data, only 20% of the firms have reported data. So this number is an estimate coming from 20%. And then look at the procedure. I ask them, what is the predictor that you use for the other 80? Because I will use like a variable like bastard line, no? Like, I don't want to tell you, like something, clearly CO2 emissions is not like a random variable that is missing at random. And they said, we use country, industry, year and size. I said, that's horrible. Like, where is the bastard variable there? And they said, well, you know, you have Russia. Yeah, I understand, but like, truly, all this strategic behavior is terrible. I'm pretty sure that I take any methodology that is reasonable as sample selection here, it will give me like 50% more emissions, 60. So we're operating on extremely bad information. So there, using the synthetic data, will improve our decision making significantly. So I understand it will make life much harder to explain, but it will make the quality of our decision making better. That's the mean, that's the people that are here, that all of us that have good intentions. And so therefore, that doesn't need very much regulation. But what happens when the person who's going to generate that data has an agenda, and he uses the same method that we have, and he gets 22 billion metric tons of CO2 emissions?
Let's see if the people that are here not only have good intentions, but also good questions. Happy. Do we have a mic? Do we have a mic?
We can repeat the question.
Okay.
So the question is really because of something you said in the beginning, is that you don't believe that it could be something out of nothing. And it sort of brought into my mind like a theoretical question. So all of the view of statistics, I've taken courses in statistics, but I'm not the view of statistics, in some sense, in my opinion, even the view of machine learning, or this theory of machine learning, is that there's data and you summarize it. And the question is, do you summarize it well, succinctly? But it's not a computational approach. So in other words, things evolve, okay? And if we knew the computational rules according to which they evolve, that, so let's say even an opinion, there's an opinion, which let's say you're asking in a survey, maybe you could imagine that I'm a machine. There's some rules according to which my opinion evolves. There's some randomness, it has a lot to do with what's happening in the world, but there's some rules that you could calculate to expect what my opinion would be down the line. So it's not out of nothing. You know, if we knew these rules, if we could summarize them as an algorithm, then, you know, of course, there are more people being born and so forth. But what I'm saying is, this computational view, is that part of statistics? Is that part of machine learning? If people made it explicit? Was it always, okay, we've summarized the data today, chat at a GPT, I don't know, 100, that was collected data that was accumulated in the last 10 years.
So maybe I actually can answer this a little bit, and I still don't know if these mics actually pick up. There is a segment of synthetic data that we didn't talk about, you know, which is having these digital twins, as we know them in industry, also for societies, right? I mean, people increasingly try to build up, you know, cities or countries and policies and put people in and see what would happen, right? So the notion that you could simulate what happens and predict what might be the opinions or the reactions to a policy is something that the social scientists and the statisticians that work with them, I wouldn't say embrace, but it is present. It's not entirely absent.
No, but the central bank, the Fed, that's exactly what it does.
That's what they do. That's right. Not opinions, but
not opinions.
Well, in a way, it is actually.
Your example is exactly what the Fed does to estimate what is going to be the inflation rate 3 years from now to make the decision today, because they understand the delay. Now, in their case, the forecast that they're producing a simulation is restricted by a lot of the economic knowledge that we already have about how the U.S. works today. So they make mistakes. I mean, like, I'm telling you, they never expected, well, I mean, I'm not going to say, I think that they never expected the inflation rate that was going to happen after we recover from COVID. Okay, I mean, so let's give it a chance. So I don't think that they never expected the vaccine to be found so fast. They never expected the adoption to be so fast. I mean, we vaccinated 100 million people in 3 months. That was unthinkable. No one would have bet on that. That was a fantastic performance. And then people, after being vaccinated and felt better, went out and purchased like everything they could. So truly, these are 3 massive events that were completely unexpected. The Fed I know for firsthand that the Fed was expecting a recession that was going to last 3 years. And it did not last, like 3 months, 6 months, no more than that.
But those are new inputs. What happened are new inputs to a computational model that could have, okay, so now we update because there are new inputs. What you're
so then they knew that, in fact, by the way, the Fed in June of 2021, was already forecasting a very high inflation rate. So I don't know if you remember the events. I mean, so I don't know if you want some macro class, but in February of 2021, okay, the inflation rate of the United States is 1.7. Biden requests $880 billion for infrastructure. The Congress actually says yes, okay? Then, in March of that year, we start in a process of what is called amendment. We wanted to change a little bit the budget and just change some decimals. And instead of $880 billion, we wanted $3.2 trillion. Okay? Like a small amendment. And this just reflects the fact that, Congress is like a bunch of idiots. Okay? So then...
I thought you were going to say the word idiot.
Well, only when they deserve it. Yeah. So then in April, we send a check to everybody, okay, for the Biden administration. At that moment, inflation rate was less than 2%. Okay? By June, 2 months later, the inflation rate is already 4%. And the Fed already tells the government, says, you better not ask for more money because you're not going to be able to spend it. We are going to actually move in the other direction. We have too much inflation. By September, the inflation rate is at 7%, okay? Still, Congress is talking about $3.2 trillion. Is that okay? And at that moment, the Biden administration says, I am not going to be able to spend even the $800 that they authorized me to do because the world is going to have far too much inflation rate. After that, we get the China supply disruption on the 4th quarter because of COVID, the Delta, and then Putin decides to invade Ukraine. So by the moment the government is authorized to spend the money, they said, well, we will just keep it. The interest rate was already increasing, so they move really fast. I just want to highlight how fast this is. There were one shock after the other, but these models do not anticipate these events. Okay, so they are extremely, extremely good, but they don't have the capacity to figure it out. However, I think that the government of the United States should be better prepared for this crisis. Okay, so let me use it differently. So if I put someone to create me possible future catastrophes of the United States, I think that a pandemic should have been something that we consider as a possibility. I think that a massive bacteria that we don't have an antibiotic should be a possibility. Nuclear war should be a priority. We should be investing in the resilience of the whole country in preparation for that. And that should include the Fed. So kind of, even though I have said very nice things about the Fed, and that they actually use this data, this has limitations because we impose constraints that makes us feel very comfortable at the moment we're doing the simulation. In macroeconomics, we do this all the time, actually. And we believe it, by the way.
We have 2 hands up here, and then there was another.
Can I just add like one quick comment to Shafi's question? So I think that's actually a very good point. And I think that maybe we're using synthetic data in like many overloaded ways. I think that what you're describing is much closer to imputation. I think of that as basically being imputation. Like I'm already giving you my context, I'm giving you a lot of information about my trajectory, and, I'm asking you about some outcome. That in some sense, it is based on like, real information, right? Like information about the real world. And I definitely don't think that that's creating information out of nothing. Because I think that that's like imputation based on real facts. I think that what I'm more skeptical of is this thing of like, oh, let's generate a bunch of Gaussians and let's create a hypothetical, as you said, like hypothetical city, and see what happens, how things play out. I think that's hard.
No, but this is what we do. I mean, maybe that's
I'm not saying I'm not saying it can't like give insights. I'm just saying it's definitely harder to justify that it says something about about the real world. The more context you have, the more real context you have to push into your simulator or whatever you call it, like the more you can trust that it can actually say something about the real world.
So if you're going to generate a bunch of Gaussians, you better have very good theory about how the world works. And that's maybe what you're saying.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And now if you have no theory and no data, then
I'm saying why not invest in the theory? I think.
Yes, I have a question about what are, according to you, the ethical implication of creating a digital persona? As in the line of research, we get like perfect models of each individual. Like we have, maybe there's no free will anymore, or government can manipulate us, corporations can manipulate us. They know they can replicate us exactly. So is there because it's ethical, right? The title of the panel. So should we worry about that, or no?
No. What is the question again? Should
we worry about making clones?
Yeah, if I make a digital persona of yourself, for instance, I'll be able to predict your behavior.
You of me, or you want to perfect me?
Just a clone.
Oh, okay, so it's the same imperfect version of me?
Yeah.
Like if I create a...
Because I usually try to improve two things.
I think if we have like an LLM customized to each individual, right? That would exactly predict behavior, thinking, voting behavior, and so, because we are trying to do that, right? Trying to predict behavior based on characteristics, but
we have always tried to do that, isn't it?
And that's where the privacy considerations come in, right? So some people are happy to reveal, if you think back to like recommender systems things, some people are very happy to reveal everything about themselves in order to get better recommendations, right? So if you get something from a good clone of yourself, such that online you have a persona and things are recommended to you and it somehow knows you very well, then there can be benefits. But other people might feel like, hey, I want to protect my own identity. I don't want a clone of myself. So I think it really should be a opt-in kind of thing. Like we should be able to, how much data you release about yourself should affect how close the digital snake is.
And as we learned this, we saw today, if we have only few people, we have good clones on only few people and bad clones on everybody else, that's good enough for many applications. Right? So,
I mean, in Netflix, there is a persona of yourself. What is your preferences on movies? That's much, much better from the service point of view than the way we used to do it before. I mean, so I don't see any problem with that. And again, opting-in is a very important, and also the limit. I opt in into a service that is limited and bounded.
But the question is how it's used and how transparent everybody is about how it's used. I think the spooky part is that maybe they have a copy of the persona in their labs, and then they're using things to manipulate me without telling anybody, right?
Yeah,
right.
if
there's
go ahead.
Well, I talked about this at the Park et al. Approach, where they interviewed 1,000 people for 2 hours, and then they trained 1,000 models, one for each person, on that data, right? So they were essentially creating like digital twins of those people, and then asking survey questions, and this is where the 85% that you asked about comes from. And so I think certainly you would need someone's permission to do that. In that case, of course, they conducted the interviews for the purpose of training those models. So they definitely had those people's permission. And then I think a really interesting issue is like, can those people later remove that permission? Who owns that model, right? So if you train a model, you interview me and you train a model and now you have a Steph model, and rather than asking Steph survey questions, you ask the model questions, and that saves me time, and that's great. But at some point, if I want to put an end to that, right? I've changed my mind. I'm not comfortable about this, right? Do I have a right then to make somebody kill that model, right? Or I mean, if I were to like pass away, right? Is that model like? Would it still be relevant to use that model and still create predictions for Stephanie? Am I still part of the population that you're making inference to?
And
I think
would it reveal things that you would not reveal?
Right. Right. I mean, it'd be nice if I had the ability to like I don't want to answer those survey questions. You can ask my model, and then I'm going to look at what it says, and before I pass those on, right? Before I approve it. Yeah.
Okay, so quick point about that. So first, that relates, what you're just saying relates to what Nicola Pupperno talked about yesterday, the unlearning problem, right? The right to be forgotten, right? But this idea of being able to edit yourself in some sense and say, maybe be more fine-grained and say, I'm okay revealing, my religion, but not my sexual preference or something like that, right? So that would be nice. And it reminds me, there was an experiment some years ago, Google did this in their ad serving, where they said, here's your persona that we're serving ads to, and you can go in and edit it. And by editing it, you can say that, that this isn't how I feel, or, you could change kind of where you feel about certain things, what you like, what you don't like, and also how much you want it to reveal. But what they found was that when people did studies on it, it didn't have the effect that you wanted. It wasn't like they actually paid a lot of attention to that persona when they were serving the ads. So, but ideally, that would be the goal. I think you could go in and edit yourself. And
add Gaussian noise.
Okay, we're going to collect the 3 questions, and then I'll do a last round.
Yeah, thanks. My question is related to the last discussion before we move to the audience. It's my concern is about a ship of thesis kind of problem for synthetic data. At a point, we keep replacing the synthetic data and include it in our real data. And at what point, given that we don't know what the true underlying data generating process is, what point is the data not representative of the data at all? And I know we had some discussions about evaluations, but given that that is very sparse, how do we sort of know when to stop?
I'm going to collect the 3 and then.
Hello. Another question that I have that's kind of continuing Shafi's question is, in the extreme events when you have you can't model every single possible thing that can happen to the world, right? So in the extreme event, how do we prevent us from over-relying on synthetic data to give us answers about extreme events? That's kind of the general question that I have.
So recalling universal approximation functions and the word barter, I understood that to be if I choose to be a member of Facebook, the invisible barter is that all my data is being sold by Meta many times over. So now I think about, okay, I'm applying for jobs. Workday has become a universal repository or an agent for collecting information that I wouldn't otherwise give anyone except that I want to be considered for that job. How far away are we from, so there's a limitation on whether I can opt in or not. I'm coerced to give that data. And that becomes, it's beyond my control that data can be, Workday one day could be aggregated, possibly in some differential privacy sense, and then be used to confirm biases as well as try to correct for them.
Anyone wants to jump in on any of the... Go ahead.
Okay, choose whatever one.
Oh, you're choosing me?
It sounded like you wanted to answer.
No, I was just looking at that. Looking to the left. These are part of the norms that we have to discuss as a society to determine what is the way we're going to share our data. So I would prefer that my data becomes an asset, okay, and therefore I rent the information like my DNA. I would prefer that we solve this with an asset where I can exclude, so it becomes a good. So I exclude person from using. When they use it and make money, they share that with me, and then I pay for every search that I do in Google. So that to me, a market is a much more efficient way, and because the market has an automatic, it's the only institution that is win-win, because both of us, in some sense, are voluntarily entering a transaction. So I pay a price that is lower than my reservation price, and you're selling a price that is above your cost. So if I could create a market for information, that would be significantly better to solve that your last question. But I don't know if we can actually do that. In the absence of that, Then we have to, by the way, that market is automatically regulated. It's an asset, and we know, so there are millions of things that come with an asset that makes it much better. But if you have to do that, then you have to choose as a society what would be the proper sharing tool. And I don't know, I will have mine, and my kids have a very different one. They are totally open, they share their life online. And I share their life with my friends online as well. But it has to be what makes you comfortable. But I think that at some point in time, if we feel that the data is sensitive, like financial data or health data, then the regulation is that we share only within the industry and nothing else.
The problem is you cannot change your mind.
Well,
you're comfortable, what if you change your mind? It's too late.
You
will not get a job.
I know. That discussion, the point I want to say is that discussion has to take place. It's simple, Tal, because you just tell people that in order to get your information, they have to pay you $3 million.
The current problem is that Rich already signaled.
Yeah, I guess.
Sorry,
No, we have to go.
But I don't want to stop the discussion. I just have to.
No, that's all right. We do want to be respectful of the time. I don't want to lose German citizenship by not being on time. So I'm going to cut us off here and thank all the tech and support folks because they actually run into overtime otherwise.
Also have to go.
Thank you, everybody, for a great